I came to Montana for a photography job, but 24 hours later, the town believed I was engaged to the most feared cowboy in the county. I thought it was just one harmless lie, until pretending to love him started feeling painfully real. I came to Montana believing the hardest part of my week would be photographing wild horses across the open valleys. Couldn't have been more wrong. Less than 24 hours after arriving, an entire town believed I was engaged to the most respected and most intimidating cowboy in the county. The strange part? He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked me straight in the eyes and quietly whispered, "Please, just go along with it." That single sentence changed everything. My name is Oliver Hayes. I'm 23 years old, a freelance wildlife photographer from Seattle, and until that week, my biggest relationship had been with my camera. I'd spent years chasing stories through photographs instead of living one myself. When an outdoor magazine hired me to capture Montana's famous horse ranches before the annual Reed Valley Rodeo Festival, I accepted without thinking twice. A week surrounded by mountains, horses, and endless sunsets sounded like the perfect assignment. Love wasn't part of the plan. Neither was pretending to be someone else's fiancé. The drive from the airport felt like entering another world. "You'll know him when you see him," my editor had joked over the phone. "He's impossible to miss." I assumed he meant the cowboy wore a giant hat or carried an oversized belt buckle. I had no idea what he really meant. When I reached the ranch entrance, I slowed my truck. A massive wooden sign welcomed visitors. Reed Valley Ranch. Below it stood rows of white fences surrounding acres of green fields where dozens of horses galloped freely. The place looked like something from an old Western movie. Beautiful, peaceful, timeless. As I parked near the main barn, several ranch hands loaded supplies onto trailers, while others prepared horses for the weekend festival. Everyone seemed busy, everyone except one man. He stood alone near the far fence, gently brushing a black stallion. He wore faded blue jeans, worn leather boots, and a light denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His dark cowboy hat shaded part of his face, but even from a distance I noticed how calm he looked around the horse. The stallion rested its forehead against his shoulder as if it trusted him completely. Neither of them moved for several quiet seconds. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It was simply peaceful. I instinctively lifted my camera. Click. The shutter echoed softly. The man immediately looked toward me. Our eyes met. Even from across the pasture, something about his steady gaze made me lower the camera. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smiling either. He simply watched me. Then he gently patted the horse's neck before walking in my direction. Each step was slow and confident. By the time he reached me, I realized my editor had been right. He was impossible to miss. He looked to be around 30, broad-shouldered, sun-tanned, with warm hazel eyes that somehow appeared both guarded and kind at the same time. "You must be the photographer," he said. His voice was low and calm. I nodded. "Oliver Hayes." He extended his hand. "Jaxon Reed." His handshake was firm but respectful. "I hope you don't mind," I said, holding up my camera. The light was perfect. He glanced toward the horse. "He likes attention." The horse. A tiny smile appeared. "No." I laughed before realizing he was joking. That single unexpected smile completely changed my first impression. Maybe he wasn't as intimidating as everyone claimed. The pickup truck suddenly pulled into the yard. An older ranch hand leaned out the window. "Jaxon, your grandma's looking for you." Jaxon sighed quietly. "She worries too much." The ranch hand laughed. "She's been organizing the festival since sunrise." Jaxon looked back at me. "The guest cabin's ready. You can leave your bags there." He pointed toward a small white cabin surrounded by wildflowers. "If you need anything, just ask." I thanked him before unloading my equipment. The cabin was cozy, with wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and a front porch overlooking the horse pastures. I spent the next hour unpacking cameras and lenses before deciding to explore town. The annual rodeo festival had already begun. Colorful banners stretched across Main Street. Families walked between local shops while musicians played country songs outside the diner. Children laughed as they chased each other around food trucks. The entire town felt warm and welcoming. I stopped at a bakery for coffee before wandering through handmade craft booths. As I photographed decorations, someone accidentally bumped into me from behind. My coffee splashed across my shirt. Oh no! A young woman quickly handed me napkins. I'm so sorry. It's okay. Before I could clean the stain, another voice interrupted. There he is. An elderly woman hurried toward me with surprising speed. She wore a bright blue Western dress and a huge smile. Without warning, she wrapped both arms around me. Oh, sweetheart. You finally came. I froze.
I'm sorry.
She stepped back, tears shining in her eyes. I've waited months to meet you. Before I could explain, she grabbed my hand. Everyone, people nearby turned around. My grandson finally brought his fiancée home. The entire street erupted into applause. My heart nearly stopped. What? I looked around desperately. Then I saw Jaxon walking toward us from across the street. His expression changed the instant he realized what was happening. For a brief second, panic flashed across his face. He hurried over. Grandma! She beamed proudly. You should have told me Oliver was this handsome. I blinked. Wait. There's been a misunderstanding. Jaxon looked directly into my eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he did something completely unexpected. He stepped beside me, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and quietly said, Grandma's right. The crowd cheered even louder. I stared at him in complete disbelief. He leaned closer so only I could hear. Please. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I'll explain everything. The celebration continued around us as strangers congratulated us, shook our hands, and wished us a happy future together. I smiled awkwardly through every conversation, completely confused. Nearly 15 minutes later, Jaxon finally guided me away from the crowd toward an empty horse stable behind the festival grounds. The cheerful noise faded into the distance. The moment we were alone, I crossed my arms. You've got exactly 30 seconds to explain why an entire town thinks we're engaged. Jaxon removed his hat and rubbed the back of his neck. I know this sounds unbelievable. It already does. He let out a slow breath. My grandmother has been recovering from heart surgery. I stayed silent. She worries about me constantly. She thinks I've spent too many years putting this ranch before my own life. He looked toward the open fields beyond the stable. Last month she told me that if I couldn't show her I was building a future with someone, she'd transfer ownership of part of the ranch into a charity trust. She loves this place, but she's convinced I'll end up completely alone. I frowned. So, why me? Because yesterday she saw your welcome paperwork on my desk. He gave a small, embarrassed smile. She noticed your first name, assumed you were the person I'd been talking about, and started telling everyone my fiancé was finally arriving. You could have corrected her. I tried. What happened? He looked toward the festival where his grandmother was happily greeting guests. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Silence settled between us. Then he met my eyes again. I'm asking for 2 weeks. I stared at him. Just until the festival ends. He hesitated before speaking again. I'll make sure you're paid for your time. And after it's over, I'll tell everyone we decided to keep our relationship private while we travel. I couldn't believe this conversation was real. This is insane. I know. You don't even know me.
No.
And you still want me to pretend to be your fiancé? He nodded once. Not because it was easy, because he genuinely had nowhere else to turn. I looked at the honest worry on his face, then thought about the joyful smile his grandmother had worn only minutes earlier. Against every logical thought in my head, I sighed. 2 weeks. Relief washed across his face. You'll do it. I pointed a finger at him. This stays completely fake. Of course. No lies that hurt anyone. I promise.
No surprises.
He smiled faintly. I'll try. Before I could change my mind, he reached into the pocket of his denim jacket. He pulled out a simple silver ring. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. just polished silver with a small engraved horse running across the band. He looked at it for a second, before gently taking my hand. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said quietly. "You don't have to wear it forever. Just long enough." He carefully slid the ring onto my finger. "For everyone to believe you belong beside me." The silver ring felt strangely heavy on my hand. Not because of its weight, because every time I looked at it, I remembered the promise I'd made. For 2 weeks, I wasn't Oliver Hayes, the freelance photographer from Seattle. I was Jaxon Reed's fiancé. At least, that's what the entire town believed. By sunrise the next morning, the ranch was already alive. The distant sound of horses echoed across the valley, while ranch hands moved between barns carrying feed and equipment. Golden sunlight rolled over the hills, painting everything in warm shades of amber. I stepped onto the cabin porch with my camera hanging around my neck. The view was breathtaking. Wild horses grazed near the river while mist floated above the fields. "This is unbelievable," I whispered to myself. "You'll miss breakfast if you keep talking to the mountains." I turned around. Jaxon leaned against the porch railing holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me. "I wasn't sure how you take it." I smiled. "Black. Good. So you guessed." He shook his head. "I asked the waitress at the diner yesterday." I laughed. "You investigated me?" "I did my homework." For the first time, our conversation felt natural instead of awkward. We walked toward the horse barn together. Neither of us said much. Surprisingly, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Felt peaceful. A cheerful voice interrupted us. There they are. Jackson's grandmother, Evelyn Reed, hurried toward us carrying a basket filled with homemade cinnamon rolls. "I knew you'd have breakfast together." Before either of us could react, she slipped her arm through mine. "Oliver, dear, you're much too skinny." Jaxon chuckled. "I've been telling him that since yesterday." I looked at him. "You've known me less than 24 hours. I stand by my opinion." His grandmother laughed so hard she nearly dropped the basket. For a brief moment, the fake engagement actually felt convincing. After breakfast, Jaxon saddled 2 horses. "I thought today you could photograph the north pasture. You trust me around horses? You'll survive." "That's not exactly comforting." He grinned. "If you fall off, I'll catch you." I raised an eyebrow. "Confident, aren't you?" "You'll see." 20 minutes later, I almost proved him right. My horse suddenly stopped beside a creek while I was trying to photograph a group of foals. The unexpected movement threw me off balance. I slipped sideways. Before I hit the ground, a strong hand caught my arm. Jaxon steadied both me and the horse with effortless calm. "You okay?" Our faces were only inches apart. I nodded. "I thought you said I'd survive." "I also said I'd catch you." His hand remained around mine a second longer than necessary. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The sound of running water filled the silence. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Thanks." "Anytime." He slowly let go. For reasons I couldn't explain, I wished he hadn't. The morning passed quickly as I photographed horses running through the open valley. Jaxon rarely posed. Instead, he simply worked, repairing fences, checking water lines, helping younger ranch hands, comforting nervous horses. Everything he did seemed effortless. Every time I lifted my camera, another genuine moment appeared. No pretending. No performance. Just a man completely devoted to his ranch. By noon, we returned to the farmhouse. The dining table was crowded with family members, neighbors, and ranch workers sharing lunch together. The moment we walked inside, conversation stopped. Someone whistled. About time the happy couple showed up. I nearly choked on my lemonade. A younger ranch hand laughed. "So?" He looked directly at me. "When's the wedding?" I glanced toward Jaxon. He calmly took a bite of his sandwich. "Still planning." The table erupted with excited chatter. I leaned closer. "You could have warned me." "I forgot." "You forgot they're planning our wedding?" "They're enthusiastic. They're terrifying." He tried not to laugh. Unfortunately, he failed. Seeing him laugh openly surprised everyone at the table. One older ranch worker smiled. Haven't seen Jaxon laugh like that in years. The room suddenly became very quiet. Jaxon looked slightly embarrassed. I noticed several people exchanging emotional smiles. Later that afternoon, I wandered into the old horse barn searching for better lighting. Instead, I found Jaxon sitting beside an elderly gray horse. He gently brushed its mane without saying a word. The horse looked too old to stand comfortably. "How long have you had him?" I asked softly. Jaxon smiled. "His name's Ranger. He was my dad's horse." I sat beside him. "He's beautiful. He doesn't run anymore." Jaxon continued brushing slowly. "But every morning he waits for me." I watched the old horse nuzzle Jackson's shoulder. "He trusts you." Jaxon looked down. "He taught me what loyalty looks like." His voice carried a sadness I hadn't heard before. Instead, Evelyn found us again. "There you are." She looked disappointed. "Why aren't you two dancing?" Jaxon answered first. "I don't dance." His grandmother folded her arms. "You do tonight." She turned toward me. "Oliver." I laughed nervously. "I've got 2 left feet." "Perfect." She gently pushed us toward the dance floor. "You'll match." The band began playing a slow country song. Everyone around us paired off. I looked at Jaxon. "We can fake this too." He nodded. "If you're comfortable." He placed one hand lightly around my back. I rested mine on his shoulder. His other hand found mine. Warm, steady, careful. We moved awkwardly at first. Then gradually, our steps found the rhythm. "You weren't kidding," he whispered. "About what?" "You really do have 2 left feet." I laughed. "I warned you." "You stepped on my boot 3 times. "Only 3? So far." We both laughed quietly. The tension disappeared. As the song continued, neither of us noticed the crowd watching. Several older couples smiled. Someone even took our picture. For just a few minutes. Pretending didn't feel like pretending anymore. After the dance, we walked back toward the ranch beneath a sky filled with stars. The road was silent except for crickets and distant horses. "I had a good time," I admitted. "So did." "I thought you hated dancing." "I usually do. But I didn't hate it tonight." His answer stayed with me the entire walk home. The next morning, I spent hours editing photographs inside the ranch office while Jaxon met with suppliers outside. I searched for an empty memory card inside one of the desk drawers. Instead, my hand touched a thick manila envelope. Across the front, in bold black letters, were the words, "Confidential, Reed Valley Property Agreement." I wasn't trying to snoop, really, but as I picked up the envelope, a folded document slipped halfway out. Across the top of the first page, one sentence immediately caught my eye: "Transfer of ranch ownership." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the words printed across the page. Transfer of ranch ownership. Below it were several legal signatures, financial statements, and a date. The transfer would take place the Monday after the Reed Valley Rodeo Festival ended. The exact day our fake engagement was supposed to be over. A cold feeling settled in my chest. "No." I whispered the word to myself. My eyes rushed across the paperwork. There were numbers I didn't understand. References to loans, bank approvals, property evaluations. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't even close. But one thought refused to leave my mind. Jaxon had lied to me. The fake engagement, the festival, the smiling photographs. It had all been about saving the ranch. Not about his grandmother. Not about trust. Not about me. I slowly placed the papers back inside the envelope. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was another explanation. Then another memory hit me. The way he'd immediately agreed when someone asked about wedding plans. The fake engagement photos. The newspaper interview scheduled for tomorrow. Everything suddenly felt carefully planned. I leaned back in the office chair. Was I just part of the plan? The office door opened. I quickly slid the envelope back into the drawer. Jaxon walked inside carrying 2 bottles of water. "There you are." He smiled. "I've been looking everywhere." I forced a smile. I was organizing today's pictures. He handed me a bottle. You've been working too hard. Our fingers brushed. Normally, that small touch made me smile. This time, it only reminded me of the ring on my hand. I looked at him. His expression was exactly the same. Calm, kind, honest. But now, I didn't know what to believe. You okay? He asked. I'm fine. He studied my face for a second. You don't look fine. I said I'm okay. The words came out sharper than I intended. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. If something's wrong, I'm just tired. He nodded slowly. If you need some space.
Ido.
He hesitated before quietly leaving the office. The moment the door closed, I buried my face in my hands. I can't do this. That evening, the ranch hosted a barbecue for neighbors and festival volunteers. Music played from old speakers while children chased each other across the yard. Usually, I enjoyed photographing moments like these. Tonight, I couldn't even lift my camera. Jaxon noticed immediately. You've barely eaten. I'm not hungry. You've barely spoken.
I'm listening.
He looked unconvinced. Before he could ask another question, several ranch workers called him over to help unload supplies. The moment he walked away, Evelyn sat beside me. She smiled warmly. I haven't seen Jaxon this happy in years. I looked toward him across the yard. He was laughing with two ranch hands. He deserves to be happy. He does. She gently patted my hand. And so do you. A lump formed in my throat. If she knew the truth, would she still smile like that? The next morning, I joined Jaxon to photograph the horses before sunrise. Neither of us said much. The silence felt different now. Heavy. Awkward. As we reached the hill overlooking the pasture, the horses burst into a full gallop beneath the golden morning light. It should have been the perfect photograph. Instead, my eyes stayed on Jaxon. He looked peaceful, almost hopeful. How could someone look so sincere? If everything had been a lie? Oliver. You've been avoiding me. I'm just focused on work.
No.
He stopped walking. Something happened. I looked away. Nothing happened. He sighed. I don't know what I did, but whatever it is, I'd rather hear the truth. His words hurt more than they should have, because I wanted to tell him. I wanted him to explain everything. Instead, fear answered for me. I simply walked away. Later that afternoon, I packed my camera equipment into my truck. Quietly, without saying goodbye, without leaving a note. The silver ring rested on the cabin table, exactly where he'd placed it on my finger days earlier. I looked at it one last time.
I'm sorry.
Then I drove away from Reed Valley Ranch. The road back toward town blurred through my windshield. Not because of the dust, because my eyes refused to stay dry. I kept asking myself the same question. Why did leaving hurt so much? It wasn't a real relationship. It wasn't supposed to matter. So why did it feel like my heart was breaking? Back at the ranch, Jaxon walked toward the guest cabin carrying 2 cups of coffee. He knocked once. No answer. He smiled. Oliver. Silence. He opened the door. The cabin was empty. His smile disappeared. He noticed the missing suitcase first, then the empty camera shelf. Finally, his eyes landed on the silver ring. It rested alone on the wooden table. Jaxon looked up instantly. What? The papers from my office. His expression changed. You moved them. I asked the attorney to leave them there yesterday. A terrible realization crossed his face. Oh no! Evelyn frowned. What is it? He must have seen them. She closed her eyes. And thought you were selling the ranch. Jaxon stood so quickly the porch chair tipped backward. He thinks I lied. Evelyn slowly shook her head. Jaxon. Those weren't sale papers. I know. They were the final approval for refinancing the ranch. He nodded. The old loan was costing us too much. You refinanced everything so the ranch hands wouldn't lose their jobs. And so you wouldn't have to sell any land. He rubbed his forehead. I wanted to tell Oliver after the festival. Why didn't you? A sad smile crossed his face. Because once the paperwork was finished, he reached into his jacket pocket. Inside was a small velvet box. Not the old silver ring. A new one. Simple. Elegant. I wasn't planning to ask him to keep pretending. Evelyn looked at the ring with tears in her eyes. You were going to ask him for real. Jaxon nodded. I realized somewhere between sunrise rides and late-night conversations. He swallowed hard. That I wasn't pretending anymore. The next morning, the entire town gathered for the championship rodeo. Colorful flags waved above the arena. Music echoed through the valley. Families filled every seat. But Jaxon barely noticed any of it. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was searching every face, hoping, somehow, Oliver would come back. Minutes before the opening ceremony, the event organizer handed him the microphone. You ready? Jaxon looked across the packed arena. His grip tightened around the microphone. He took one slow breath, then stepped toward the center of the arena. Before today's championship begins, his voice echoed across the silent crowd. There's something I need to tell everyone. The entire rodeo arena fell silent. Hundreds of people looked toward the center of the field where Jaxon stood beneath the bright Montana sky. A microphone in one hand and a small velvet box hidden in the other. Even the horses seemed unusually still. Jaxon took a slow breath. I've spent most of my life believing I could solve every problem on this ranch by myself. A few ranch hands exchanged curious looks. But this week taught me something I should have learned years ago. His eyes swept across the crowd. I owe everyone the truth. Whispers spread through the grandstands. My engagement, he paused, started as a lie. The crowd gasped. Several people looked at Evelyn in surprise. Jaxon continued before anyone could interrupt. When Oliver arrived in Montana, he was a complete stranger. He agreed to help me after my grandmother mistakenly believed he was my fiancé. I asked him to pretend. I asked him because I was afraid of hurting the person I love most. He looked toward Evelyn. My grandmother. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes, but she smiled proudly. I thought 2 weeks of pretending would protect everyone. He lowered his head. Instead, I ended up hurting the one person who never deserved it. Silence covered the arena. I never used Oliver to sell this ranch. The paperwork he found wasn't a sale agreement. It was a refinancing agreement. I signed it to protect every family who works here. Our ranch hands. Our horses. Our home. He looked toward the people who had worked beside him for years. You've all given your lives to this place. I wasn't about to let anyone lose their future. Several ranch workers quietly wiped away tears. Jaxon swallowed hard. The biggest mistake I made wasn't asking Oliver to pretend. It was waiting too long to tell him the truth. He reached into his jacket. The velvet box appeared in his hand. I was planning to ask him something after the festival. His voice cracked. But now, I don't even know where he is. Miles away, Oliver sat inside a quiet roadside cafe just outside town. His untouched coffee had gone cold. He couldn't stop replaying every conversation he'd shared with Jaxon. The horse rides, the laughter, the dance beneath the lights, the way Jaxon had always looked at him. None of it had felt fake. The television mounted above the counter suddenly switched to a live broadcast from the Reed Valley Rodeo Festival. The local reporter smiled into the camera. We're joining a very emotional announcement from Reed Valley Ranch owner Jaxon Reed. Oliver looked up. His heart nearly stopped. Jaxon appeared on the screen. I don't know if you're watching. Oliver froze. But if you are. Jaxon looked directly into one of the television cameras. I need you to hear this. The cafe became completely quiet. Even the waitress stopped walking. You once told me there should be no lies that hurt anyone. You were right. I broke my own promise.
I'm sorry.
I should have trusted you enough to tell you everything. He opened the velvet box. I don't care if this happens in front of one person or an entire town. I don't care whether you say yes. I just need you to know that somewhere between those early morning rides And the nights we spent watching the stars. I stopped pretending. I fell in love with you. Oliver felt tears running down his face before he even realized he was crying. Jaxon smiled sadly. If this is goodbye, thank you for giving a lonely cowboy the happiest 2 weeks of his life. The broadcast ended. Oliver stood so quickly his chair nearly fell backward. How far is Reed Valley? He asked the waitress. She smiled knowingly. If you drive fast enough, you'll make it before the championship ends. Oliver was already running toward the door. Back at the arena, Jaxon handed the microphone back to the announcer. The applause was warm, supportive, but it wasn't the applause he wanted. He looked toward the entrance one last time. Nothing. He forced a small smile. I guess that's my answer. He turned to leave the arena. Jaxon! The familiar voice echoed across the field. His footsteps stopped instantly. The crowd turned together. Oliver stood at the entrance, slightly out of breath. His shirt wrinkled from the long drive. For one unbelievable second, neither of them moved. Then Jaxon started walking. Oliver did the same. Their pace became faster, then faster still, until they met halfway across the arena. Neither of them cared that hundreds of people were watching. You idiot, Oliver said, trying to smile through his tears. Jaxon laughed softly. I know. You should have told me. I should have. I thought you were using me. I never could. Oliver looked into his eyes. I know that now. Jaxon hesitated. I don't expect forgiveness. Oliver shook his head. You already have it. Relief washed over Jackson's face. He reached carefully for Oliver's hand. This time, he smiled. May I borrow your hand again? Oliver laughed through his tears. For what? So I can do this properly. Jaxon slowly knelt on one knee. The entire arena erupted into cheers before he even spoke. He opened the velvet box. Inside rested a simple platinum ring with a tiny engraved mountain and running horse along the band. It isn't the most expensive ring. Oliver smiled. I don't care. Jaxon took a steady breath. When you arrived here, I thought I was asking a stranger for a favor. I never imagined I'd find the person who makes every sunrise feel brighter. You've reminded me that a ranch isn't built only with fences and horses. It's built with the people who make it feel like home. He looked up with hopeful eyes. There is nothing fake about this. There never will be. Again. Oliver Hayes. Will you marry me? Oliver laughed as fresh tears rolled down his cheeks. You really like asking impossible questions. Jaxon smiled nervously. I'll take that as a maybe. Oliver gently pulled him to his feet. No. Jackson's smile disappeared for a second. Then Oliver wrapped both hands around his. My answer is yes. The crowd exploded into applause. Cowboy hats flew into the air. Children clapped excitedly. Several ranch hands whistled so loudly that nearby horses lifted their heads in curiosity. Evelyn covered her mouth, crying openly. I knew it, she whispered. I knew love would find him. Oliver slipped the new ring onto his finger. Fit perfectly. Jaxon laughed with visible relief. I measured the old one. You planned this. I've been planning it for days. Oliver shook his head, smiling. You really are impossible. So I've been told. Oliver leaned forward. This time there was no pretending. No misunderstandings. No hidden fears. He kissed Jaxon softly as the crowd cheered around them. Same quiet message. Home isn't always the place where you were born. Sometimes, home is the place where someone chooses to stand beside you. One peaceful evening, Oliver and Jaxon stood together on the same hill where they'd watched wild horses run beneath the sunrise. Only now they weren't pretending to be anything. They watched Ranger, the old gray horse, lazily grazing nearby. Jaxon smiled. You know. Oliver looked at him. You never did become a very good cowboy. Oliver laughed. And you never became a very good liar. Fair enough. The sky turned shades of orange and gold as the sun slowly disappeared behind the Montana mountains. Oliver slipped his fingers between Jackson's. So, What happens next? Jaxon squeezed his hand gently. We wake up tomorrow. We take care of the horses. We argue over who makes the better coffee. Oliver laughed. You still lose that argument. I know. And after that? Jaxon smiled as the evening breeze carried the sound of distant hoofbeats across the valley. After that, we spend the rest of our lives making sure neither of us ever has to pretend to be loved again. Together, they walked home beneath the endless Montana sky, where the fading sunset painted the mountains in gold, and every step forward belonged not to a fake engagement, but to a very real forever. If this story made you smile, touched your heart, or reminded you that love can appear when you least expect it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more heartfelt gay romance stories every week. Tell me in the comments. At what moment did you realize Jaxon had truly fallen in love with Oliver? Your support helps this channel grow and brings more emotional, slow-burn love stories to life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.